Working on and have been for the last several meetings, because I think this is relevant. I hope it is, and I'll try and draw out things that we've been talking about through the workshop as I go as well. So yes, I teach architecture. I'm an architect. I teach master's students of architecture, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the role that our students in Sheffield are playing in Sheffield, but also other towns and cities in the UK, through, as Elizabeth said, live projects, but also I'm going to tell you a bit about LiveWorks and the work and how we've expanded live projects to something beyond working just with our students within the curriculum. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that within the sort of context of what in Sheffield we call the civic university. And this is happening across the UK. It might well be happening here in Belgium as well, where universities are taking a much clearer sort of role, responsibility in their position in their host cities and and how they can benefit their host cities. And that's certainly the case in Sheffield. I thought it might be useful just to sort of set up a bit of context and look at this. Certainly this growing emphasis on citizen participation that we are experiencing in the UK, and I think from the sounds of it you're experiencing here as well. I'm going to show you some particular case studies of work that we've done in LiveWorks, all in the north of England, but hopefully giving you an idea of the sort of tools and the methods and the methodologies that we use in the work we do. And then I'm going to talk about networks. And I think a lot of what was being discussed today was about networks, people coming together in groups and sharing knowledge. That's certainly what you seem to be doing here. And there's a couple of instances of that we're working with at the moment. So yeah, my students are all engaged in live projects and have been for many years now. When we call them live projects, what we basically mean by that is they work outside the university and they work for community clients. So they don't do this all the time, but a very key part of their curriculum is about working with external partners. And as you can see, we've been running that for many years. We were one of the first schools of architecture to set up live projects in the UK. Many of them now are doing it. I think the belief is now that this is a good way to teach architecture students, but also everybody recognises the benefits to local communities as well. So it's my job to organise the live projects every year. Last year, or this year that we're just about to finish, we ran 19 projects, and that's with about 12 or 13 master's students, so the 5th and 6th year architecture students. They've all been out in practice, so they have a real sort of professional demeanour and a set of professional skills, and that's really important. And they basically, the primary relationship in the live project is between the group of students and the client group. We mentor them, we guide them, but we don't steer them. It's not like the other parts of the curriculum. Basically, they set up what feels like their own practice for 6 weeks, and they work with their clients. And those clients are local authorities, it might be a sort of health organisation, might be a local school, a sort of volunteer group. As long as it's public sector or voluntary sector, we'll work with them. And the brief is quite open, so I meet the client through the course of the summer leading up to the start of the academic year, and I work out sort of what the client has in terms of capacity to be a client for the students, but also what their sort of general aspirations are and objectives and why they want to work with the students. But then basically day one, I introduce the client group to the student group, and it's up to them to work out what the brief is and what the outcomes are. And that all has to be done within 6 weeks. So it's very intense, and the students work on these projects full time. And I'm always impressed at just how professional the students are. They sort of rise to the challenge. They really step up their game. I think we wish as tutors they would carry on being this professional all the way through the academic year, but somehow when they go back into the studio, things go back to being, they want to be told what to do a little bit more. But live projects, they really sort of get the responsibility that they are holding and carrying out when they're working with their clients. you can probably see this is just a snapshot from our website, that live projects come in all shapes and sizes. As long as they're with an external community client, as long as they're can be done within 6 weeks, so it's sort of deliverable within 6 weeks, then the project sort of suits the client and suits the situation. We don't have a defined output. And that for us as educators causes quite a few challenges, because we don't have a whole set of sort of defined outputs that we can look at and assess. We then have to assess the process as well. But actually that's really important in participation. It's not just about where you get to at the end, it's about the sort of benefits and the effects of the process, which is also incredibly important. So there's a really good sort of learning lesson comes out of that for the students, to really design the process and put value into the process, and not just always think about what they're going to be designing and handing over at the end of the day. So a live project might produce something that's built. Students love that. They love getting hold of power tools and bits of timber and building stuff. But of course that's a bit of a health and safety nightmare for us. But we do try and do that. We do offer construction projects every year. Other projects might be about participation toolkits. So a client might say, we've got a project, we've got this building in our neighbourhood, or we've got this, that, the other, we need ideas. But actually when the students work with them, they realise that they need to step back a bit, that they need to bring the community on board before they instigate ideas. So they do participation toolkits. They actually design toolkits, which is sort of what you've been working on just now, as a way of bringing people together and understand what is necessary, what's needed, what's hoped for, what's possible, So it's that sort of, sometimes we talk about what we do in live projects as almost like pre-project projects. Sometimes it's the stage before that very often is just skipped straight through, and you go to what is it? How do we do it? But actually it's a case of, well, who's here and what do they want? And how can we get other people involved? Just starting to sort of build that capacity for a project before you move forward. And that is a project in itself. So we do quite a lot of those. But we also do more straightforward, what you might think of as sort of design projects. So if I can make this work, there we go. This one here is a project to visualise a festival of making in Blackburn in North England. And that's actually happening this coming. I'm going to tell you about Blackburn actually. So the sort of visualisation of design ideas is incredibly useful for community groups, for local authorities who simply don't have those resources to bring to life those ideas. There's another one I'm going to tell you about, there's visions for buildings, just to sort of do good design ideas and visualise those for actual buildings that communities might have. But then we have sort of larger scale neighbourhood plans. We have, what else have we got? We've got sort of installation work. We've got walking tours. Like I say, it's sort of whatever suits the project is what they do. But as I said, live projects only sit within 6 weeks in the whole calendar. So beyond that, we haven't got much to offer when it comes to deploying our students. When our client groups come to us outside that time, it's a little bit tricky to sort of know what to offer them. But also, as we started to understand how we wanted to work further with local authorities, I remember talking to a head of city regeneration in Sheffield, and he said, look, the university and the council march to the different beats of different drums, he was saying. We've just got completely different timescales. So the council will think about a master plan over 10 years, 15 years. A live project is 6 weeks long. So we were really struggling to see how we could sort of marry that up and offer anything useful to a local council, but also to a community group when things do work in years, not weeks, So just 2 years ago we decided to set up LiveWorks, which is, we think of it as like a project office basically, so it runs beyond the curriculum. So we're not regimented by the academic year. We can work whenever the projects are there to work on. So I carry on working with community clients. They might, off the back of a live project, and the work that our students did for them, they might have got some funding, they might have got a plot of land, they might have got hold of a local asset like a pub or a post office, whatever it might be that's closing down, and they want to act fast, and they've got this design work. So as LiveWorks, we can pick that up. So I employ graduates and students during their holidays to continue to work on community clients. We don't run it like it's a conventional architecture practice. Very aware that there's lots of struggling architecture practices out there, especially in the north of England, and we don't want to take those conventional projects away from them. So we carry on doing these sort of pre-project, moving into early feasibility maybe, or strategic design for our community clients. But out of that idea for what LiveWorks could be, it started to really expand. And now it works really hard for us. We're asking an awful lot of LiveWorks. It's a physical space, so it's actually what we call an urban room, and it's an empty shop front in the middle of Sheffield city centre. It's opposite the local council offices, which is fantastic for us because officers have no excuse. They know where to find us. You know, we're waving at them as they go to work every morning, and you know, we've got a very close relationship now with the local council because of that. There's a pop-up cafe in the space. We're actually part of a co-working building, so there's lots of people coming and going. Lots of members of the public just pop in to get a coffee, so they see what we're doing. So, you know, on a sort of very simple level, it's a shop front for the School of Architecture because we're in a tower. We're sort of 16 floors up above Sheffield, so we want to be much more visual than that. So we can show the work that we're doing in the urban room. I teach every Thursday. I teach my studio there. Whenever we have live projects, we have live project groups based there. So people walk past this big window in Sheffield and they see students working on local projects that they will understand and recognise. And we hope it's as accessible as it possibly could be so they can just stroll in and find out what's going on. We host community workshops there, we host meetings. It's a very flexible space and it's basically open for the university to have a dialogue with the local community. So out of that we do teaching, we do research. So I'm not a researcher, I'm a teacher, but a number of my colleagues do research data collection in LiveWorks. So they'll put on an exhibition of their research and they'll get people to come in and give them feedback. We do design projects, as I said, that's through the project office with graduates, and we run it as an urban room, so we do civic engagement activities out of that room. And I'll tell you a bit more about urban rooms in a little bit. And just because we realised that even though it's a flexible space, it's still a fixed space, you can't move around, so we actually ran a competition for our students and graduates to design a mobile urban room, a mobile LiveWorks. And this is what we ended up with. We called it the POP, the Pavilion of Participation, and it pops up. It doesn't actually pop, it takes a few hours. It slowly pops up. But we've used it on a shopping street. As you can see, we had, now I'm trying to think how many thousands of people, but it's incredibly busy 2 weeks in August last year, where we set it up and a client group used it to engage people in projects going on in Sheffield. And we've used it in school playgrounds and for various other things. So that's really good for us. It gives us that flexibility. And I think this is probably one of those techniques that I think is not just, it's not just useful for a university to have this. A community group could have one, a regeneration organisation, an arts group. This sort of thing can be incredibly useful. Just to sort of give you a little bit of background about the Civic University. So Sheffield was set up by local people. So about 150 years ago, every working man gave a penny to set up Sheffield University. So it was a people's university. They set up a teaching hospital at the same time and a university. So we've always had that very close connection to our host city. But I think as we've developed into this sort of very well-known international research institution, a Russell Group university. We've got this sort of global reach now. We've lost those roots in our host city. But when our fairly recently appointed Vice-Chancellor came along, he went back to the sort of beginnings of Sheffield University and said that's really important. We should reconnect with our host city. And so he started this programme called the Civic University. So he's actually funded quite a lot of work which has direct impact in the city of Sheffield and the city region. Now he's interested in employment, inclusivity, sort of skills. We've got a robotics centre, we've got partnerships with Boeing in a sort of advanced manufacturing centre. So there's lots of top-end, high, innovative stuff going on. We think this is pretty innovative, what we're doing, but I wouldn't call it top-end because we're there on the ground, working one-to-one all the time in residence. So this is the sort of other end of the Civic University. We think it's just as important, but it's not as glitzy, perhaps. But we try and do everything we can to be civic, to have a civic responsibility in the work that we do with our students. Because for many years we were teaching students and they were going off to London, wherever it might be, internationally they were working in all these amazing practices. And all of that sort of energy was going to waste in the time it was actually happening when they were actually learning these skills. So now we've got this sort of, what we think of as a win-win situation where our students are learning, our academics are doing research, and it's all going to the benefit of the city. And that's what we're really careful about, that we're channeling all that energy and time and fresh thinking and innovation into the city that set us up in the first place. Okay, so I'm very aware of the UN Habitat report because some of our students, some of our staff went over to the conference last year in Quito, so they were sort of instrumental in this new world agenda that was, new urban agenda that came out of the conference there. I think what was really remarkable about the conference and the World Cities report that came out was just this real central positioning of the rights of the citizen to get involved in the development of the city. So this idea of the right to the city, this idea of democratic participation, they said you can't have what you want in terms of environmentally sustainable, resilient, socially inclusive, safe, violence-free, economically productive. You can't have that sort of city if you don't open up the production of the city to citizens. They were very clear about that. They said it was an ethical and sort of moral responsibility to open up. Not just have, people don't just have the right to be safe and free in their cities, they should actually have the right to be involved in the decisions that make cities. And with rapid globalization, rapid urbanization happening across the globe, then this is becoming a real sort of pressing need. UK context, we're very aware of this because there's been a real shift in the political frameworks that we're working now in terms of planning and architecture. And, who knows what's going to happen next with the whole Brexit thing going on. I had to mention it. I've got it off my chest, but this is where we are at the moment. We don't know what's coming next, but quite recently was the first legislation that said that any public spending had to be engaged. The citizens had to be engaged in the decision making around that public spending. That was then sort of refreshed in the Localism Act, which is the sort of legislation that we're working with at the moment, which places at the heart of it this idea that people should have autonomy to get hold of local assets in their community. So this idea of community right to bid, if a local pub is closing down, if a post office, maybe not a school, because they're not closing down just yet. What else have we got? Libraries are a big thing that are closing down. If those organisations are closing down, those institutions are closing down, then the community has first refusal on getting hold of that asset. So what that really means is that now they are expected to mobilise, to collectivise, to rapidly learn the skills to run, as volunteers, a post office or a pub, or usually quite often they're hybridised actually, a pub, post office, a library. Yeah, all these sort of what were publicly funded, maybe not the pub, but the publicly funded assets are now being taken on by groups of willing volunteers, and that's the new model that the government is very keen to promote. On another sort of side of that, another aspect of that is the idea that neighbourhoods can now be planned by their communities. So the idea that there is support for neighbourhood forums to come together, collectivise, bring together their skills and develop neighbourhood plans. So there's like design guides for future development of their local areas. Now the bureaucracy involved in that, as you can imagine, the process, the time, the energy, the resources that people have to put into that is extraordinary. And again, it's all volunteer. It's all expected to come just through the sheer energy, passion, commitment of local people. But it is happening. People are doing it. So we do have hundreds of local neighbourhood plans now in operation. And they take about 5 years to get through. So of course all of this is being done, and it sounds like it's the same here, in the context of public budgets being slashed. So Sheffield City Council has had its budget slashed by 50%, over 50%. So they just don't have the resources to support these groups who are being encouraged on a sort of national political level to take their autonomy and take ownership and take parts of their sort of local neighbourhoods and run them and organise them. They just don't have the support available. So there's a bit of a sort of double whammy there, The public funding's going from the stuff, from the fabric, but also there's no support for people to pick up the pieces and make it work beyond that. So there's a real problem there. And I suppose what we're doing is we're filling in the gaps as a university. We're trying to sort of step in, and where local authorities maybe used to have be able to offer the support, we now try and do that ourselves. There are instances that we can support neighbourhood groups in the development of their neighbourhood plans, for instance. Now that's problematic, as you can imagine, because we're not a public service provider. We have other agendas as well. We need to deliver high quality teaching, we need to deliver high quality research. So the sort of relationship that we're trying to broker with our local authorities is about transformation. It's not just about us plugging the gaps. It's about saying, come on, let's get something together which is about co-production. We're taking some form of joint, collaboration in this endeavour, but we are all trying to understand what this should be rather than what it is right now. So we're trying to move it forward. We're trying to transform practices. And I'll tell you a bit about how that's going when I come to the case studies. And I've been teaching participation theory for a few years now, and just in the time I've been teaching it, I've seen the conceptual frameworks changing. I just think it's really interesting because this is changing rapidly, and it's changing quite recently. So back in the 60s, there was the first sort of flush of participation theory, and I think a lot of us for many years have been using ladders of participation like this. So when we're doing our projects, we sort of think, are we at risk of doing a bit of tokenism here, or can we possibly move it up a rung or two and get it into a little bit more of partnership? Or even are we talking about something that we're aspiring to, which is citizen control? And we know, having seen the vast majority of community engagement projects happening, we know the vast majority happen on the lower rungs. And if they're not manipulation, some really are, they are just tokenism, and things will carry on regardless, with a bit of a nod from, questionnaires or exhibitions or whatever it might be. So it's a way of being critical of common practice, it's a way of being aspirational, but it is quite a sort of reductive model. You're either there or you're there. It's about sort of levels of going up and up and up. So I was quite interested to find out that there's lots more going on about more sort of sophisticated ideas about participation. I think even the word participation now isn't being used so much, and we're talking about co-production, and we're talking about co-design and co-research. So this is a quote from Ezio Manzini, who you may have heard of DESIS, which is a network of groups across the world who are developing practice for social innovation and sustainability, design practice. So there's something really interesting here about how he talks about what we might think of as participation, where he says actually what we now need to start to think about is that the whole of society is a huge laboratory of socio-technical experimentation. So he's talking about how project by project groups are forming that involve individuals, communities, institutions and companies, so not just relying on public funding but thinking about private funding partnerships as well, and starting to bring those collectives together as and when the projects demand. And it seems to have been sort of mirrored in the projects we were talking about just before perhaps, that you don't have the same old people doing the same old stuff in the same old way. You're much more responsive to the projects and the demands of the situation. And you go forward with this idea of co-production. And I quite like the idea of co-research as well, where people are coming together and actually finding out what they have in the first place, let alone where they want to go. So co-mapping and data collection, big data collection, open source, all of that sort of stuff is part and parcel with this. So he's talking about transformation here. He's not just talking about plugging the gaps or doing things a bit better. He's talking about transformation. And I think this is a really interesting model. So I think what we're trying to do mirrors this in LiveWorks. So project by project, we put together groups of academics, teachers, students, graduates, and we work with local community groups. We go and find the right people to talk to in the council and get them involved. And we become a sort of broker for new sets of relationships around projects. So we've done a live project which is all around co-housing, and Sheffield has become a little bit of a hotspot for co-housing projects. But that's part of a network that starts to connect out to the rest of the UK and starts to share skills. So that live project was about a sort of toolkit for co-housing that wasn't just applicable to one project but could actually be transferable to others. And then, as I said before, we get involved in neighbourhood planning. We work with local community groups who have voluntarily come together to try and formulate neighbourhood plans. And we work with them, with our students, and we really start to inject good quality design aspiration into those neighbourhood plans. So just to show you some few case studies specifically about places that we're working in, and this is, I think it's really important to say we're working in over time. So we're now talking about, I think our sort of thought was, in the past has always been no more than one academic year, because that's our churn. There's new students come in and we start again. But having done this sort of work for a number of years, we know that's not sustainable. It's not enough. It doesn't maintain a relationship. It doesn't make the most of legacy. It's actually not ethical in a way. We tended to feel that we were just leaving people high and dry because we had new students to deal with and new projects. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to work long term, over time, in residence. So whenever we're working somewhere, we're there, and we're there again, and then we'll go back again, and then we'll bring the next round of students there, And we're really trying to, because that, you all know participation takes that long, and it takes that amount of care and long-term attention. So that's what we're trying to do. So this is Doncaster. Doncaster's a fairly small town outside Sheffield. It's in the Sheffield City region. And we are working specifically with this group here, Doncaster Civic Trust, part of a network of civic societies across the UK. They primarily care about heritage. That's their sort of overall national remit. Doncaster Civic Trust have got a very close relationship with Doncaster Council, and actually the Civic Trust, and this is why we like working with them, are very progressive in their remit. They go beyond heritage, and for them it's about education, and it's about reaching out to children and young people in Doncaster and celebrating and revealing the heritage of Doncaster to them and with them, but also thinking about them as the architects and the planners and the politicians of the future, and trying to build capacity and skills within that demographic so that Doncaster can actually be looked after better in the future than perhaps it is now. So we started with a participation toolkit. We did a prototype, it was tested in schools, and now it's in every school in Doncaster. It's quite often being used by teachers. We know how hard-pressed teachers are just to adopt anything within the curriculum, but a good number of teachers have actually adopted the young person's toolkit. And it's basically a board game, but it's about celebrating and understanding Doncaster's built environment and heritage. And off the back of that, we started to make some really close relationship with a handful of schools in Doncaster. So every year now, this is for the 3rd year, we've run a schools competition. And this is where we're sort of bringing things together, because we run a module for master's students in urban design and participation. And those students learn that module by working with those school children in their schools to help them develop a design for a future Doncaster. So we sort of run the two things together. So we do that on behalf of the Civic Trust, and the students, the school children, put forward their schemes, and there's a winner, and there's a wonderful event every year, and it's fantastic. The energy is brilliant in those schools around that competition. And this is our sort of fairly recent live project that we did around the Mansion House in Doncaster, which is an extraordinary building. There's only 3 mansion houses. One, you might have heard of London Mansion House. It's enormous and it's very grand. Well, there's only 3 in the whole of the UK, and Doncaster's got one. But it's very neglected, it's virtually empty. Doncaster Civic Trust want to open it up as an urban room. They want it to be the centre of participation for people in the built environment in their city. So yes, just to, so we carry on working with Doncaster Civic Trust. We're working in partnership to get funding. We're really sort of building the capacity of that organisation so they can maybe travel beyond the relationship with us. So we are helping them to put together research bids and funding bids and things like that. So I suppose we feel that we've got to a point now where they are ready to go off and continue the good work without us, which is, I suppose, what we were talking about earlier. And over to the west, to Blackburn, which is a very depressed post-industrial town. All of these are post-industrial. I mean, it's the north of England, they're bound to be. But Blackburn is very post-industrial. It was part of the Industrial Revolution and was part of the powerhouse of Manchester, but now it's fallen onto hard times. We've worked over many years in Blackburn with Blackburn is Open, which is part funded by the council, part funded by the Arts Council, and it's a regeneration body which is trying to activate and animate the town centre through occupying empty shops with artists, creative practitioners, independent businesses, festivals, activities, walking tours, just anything to get people back into the centre of town and feel that something's happening. So we worked with Blackburn is Open and Blackburn Town Council, first of all on a project called Recreate Blackburn, where we looked at this particular building, which was an empty bank right in the heart of the town centre. And the students did a design and a vision for how that could be turned into a fab lab. And off the back of that, Blackburn is Open got £700,000 worth of funding to turn it into a fab lab. So that was a direct impact that we had from that project to what's actually happening now. Blackburn Creative Capital is a project that just happened this last year, and that's the town centre there. That's mostly empty shops, but the idea is that it could be activated with this idea of a festival of making. Blackburn has got a higher than average percentage of people still working in manufacturing and craft, which is very surprising, but it's all hidden. So this was about bringing it out and celebrating it on the street. So they're running the first, what they're calling, they're very, for a small town, they're very ambitious in Blackburn, and you can just see it in terms of the sort of the quality of the outputs and the fact that they've got a designer called Wayne Hemingway involved as an advocate for them. They will not be told that because they're Blackburn they should have low aspiration. If anything, it's made them really go for it because they think, well, you know, it can't get any worse, so now we've really got to go for it. And everything is really high quality. I've been really impressed, and I have to say our students have really helped them with that as well. So now, this coming weekend, they are running not just Blackburn's Festival of Making, they are running the National Festival of Making. And, you know, the organisers said, well, there hasn't been a National Festival of Making before, so we may as well do it, you know? So it's just, I'm really impressed, and it's about a small town just really stepping up through sort of activation through, you know, arts and culture. It's very impressive. Yeah, just some sort of facts and figures about, you know, the impact that the students specifically have had. So, yeah, £700,000 worth of capital funding for the new Fab Lab. So that's wonderful. That basically means people can walk in off the street and they can use laser cutters, CNC machines, 3D printers, stuff they'll never get a chance to use any other way, and it's free. So that's amazing. So that whole idea of manufacturing is being moved forward into sort of contemporary, modern technology through this introduction of the Fab Lab. The council have adopted the students' ideas within their business plan. Like I say, they've got the National Festival of Making. I think Claire, who runs Blackburn is Open, has just been consistently surprised and impressed by the fresh thinking, the innovation, the design capacity of the students, but also the way they can visualise it. And I think what we've found working with a lot of local councils is they have the ideas, but they don't necessarily have the resources to visualise in the way that master's students do. You know, it's just different. And then moving to Sheffield, closer to home, where I teach, and I've been working intensively in Castlegate now for the past 3 years, and will continue to do so because it's a long-term relationship. And I'm not just working through the School of Architecture. It's a strategic decision by the university to focus on Castlegate in Sheffield and pour and channel a lot of sort of, work and energy and ideas into that area. So I'm working with colleagues from archaeology, engineering, history, plant and animal sciences who are looking at the ecologies of the rivers that are hidden underneath Castlegate. Lots and lots of colleagues who I've never met before. So again, it's that idea of a project demands it. We've come together, we've formed a group, and we're all working with our skills as researchers, but also with our students, and we're deploying them in Castlegate. And so we've got something quite challenging there to work out how to work together. But then we have started to put together a sort of network of stakeholders that we're working with through the years in Castlegate. And of course, the prime stakeholder is the local council. So Castlegate is the birthplace of Sheffield. It's got a castle underneath the ground. It had about 800 years of markets, which were very recently demolished. The final, beautiful, for the architect in the room, absolutely adored this gorgeous brutalist market here, as many of my colleagues did, and were heartbroken when it was demolished. But it was demolished because Sheffield is a very long, thin city centre because of the topology of the hills around. We run along a valley floor basically. It's very long and thin, just couldn't sustain a retail footfall all the way through that long, thin city centre. So the city council decided to gather up all the retail that it had ownership of, so it owned the markets, and take it to the other end of the city centre and start to condense it and densify it, which in theory makes sense. When you're working with those sort of circumstances, it makes sense. But what happened is it left Castlegate completely empty and barren. People just don't really go there anymore. So, and there's a real lack of sort of hope. Lots of people adore Castlegate because it's where people shopped and grew up. But as you can see, the shops are closing, and it's really quite desolate. So for that reason, the university, because it had so many layers of history and social history and heritage and the rivers underneath it, there was just so much to work with that we really felt that we could actually make a difference here. And so some of my colleagues are having conversations at top level, you know, with the chief executive of the council, talking about infrastructure and sustainable cities and smart cities and all of those sort of big top-down ideas. We're working at grassroots, we're working with local people, because we really feel that all of those conversations are ignoring, not willfully, not maliciously, but just not capturing the everyday stories and memories and aspirations of the people who live and work in Castlegate. So we've spent an awful lot of time on the ground, situating ourselves in empty shops, empty buildings in Castlegate, and getting to know the local characters and talking to the local people and talking to them and finding out what they feel should be happening with Castlegate. This project over 2 weeks in an empty space in Castlegate. It's actually part of Artist Studios. We opened up the door for people to come in and help us build a future vision of Castlegate. And for us, this is another really useful technique. Big models, but not models to scale, not models which are about building a master plan, models which are somehow about physically manifesting ideas. So on this model, and you can see here, you know, it started off as a baseboard, we just did that, just cardboard. And then over 2 weeks it became sort of built, colonised by people with their ideas, facilitated by artists. So here's a couple of artists working in the back. So here we had ideas of cycle routes, renewable energy, community energy stations, cultural events, squatting, empty buildings. You know, some of the ideas were quite sort of radical, quite provocative. Some of the ideas were very nostalgic, but really just sort of celebrating what's there and thinking about how that could start to generate new ideas. And then we invited the council to come and share what had happened. And we did a sharing event, and we invited members of the public who'd never had the chance to speak openly to council officials before, that never felt they were in the situation where they could do that, where they basically fed back and talked about their future ideas for Castlegate. And then we took the model and we rolled it out. It's great putting things on wheels, we find, because you can just roll it out the door and out onto the street. And people who didn't even want to come through an opening door, you know, a ground flat access, actually did stop in the street and talk to us. So, you know, we were there for hours and hours, because people just kept on coming, talking to us about Castlegate. And we were pointing out things that other people had done, and we were adding to it, and it was a fantastic day. And again, we write it all down and we send it to the council. And then we work with artists a lot. I really enjoy working with artists, because I think, especially if you get the right sort of artists who know how to work with people and aren't too closed in what they want to do. So we work with a guy called Leo Fitzmaurice who makes signs on wheels again. Wonderful putting things on wheels. So again, it was a wheel sign, and the students worked with the artist and then wheeled the sign around Castlegate. It's quite provocative, with a word like utopia in the middle of an area like Castlegate. And of course that generated an awful lot of conversations and speculations and ideas. And as you go, you're connecting with people, so you can then say, we're having a meeting. So you can do this sort of stuff and following it up by a more practical meeting about something. So this is a way of reaching out and making more public the process. So it doesn't all have to be about getting specific feedback on a specific project. It's more about just connecting with people through work like this and starting a conversation. So over the last 3 years we've run a festival where we set up in an empty department store. So this is a fantastic Castle House. It's a fantastic 1950s building which is listed. So we set up a festival and we invited lots of people to come and just show their wares and show their art and run activities. Local people from Castlegate got involved in that. We've done a publication of our work that's been sent out across the council and to various other people as well, just to raise aspiration. So live projects don't produce work like this, so it's got a bit pixelated, but this is an incredibly ambitious thesis project which is about an arts and engineering faculty in Castlegate. And of course that will never be built. It's not even proposed as a real project. It's a speculation. It's an idea of how you might actually start to sort of be ambitious, a bit like Blackburn. You know, why not? It's just that question. Well, why not? What's stopping Castlegate from being a new centre of excellence in arts and engineering, for instance? But the speculative projects are just actually as useful as deliverable projects, we find, because it gets people excited, it gets people investing in the future of their place, because they think, well, if a student has spent that amount of time and skill in doing something for here, then maybe here is actually worth valuing after all. It's just that raising of value and aspiration, which is so important. So one of the sort of primary relationships between the university group who are working in Castlegate and the city is the local authority. And we're working specifically with the regeneration team. They have got a master plan, which is this, for Castlegate. It's part of the whole city centre master plan. I think it was done in 2008, and it is in the process of being revised. So because of the timing coincided, we're working very closely with this regeneration team on the revision of the master plan. But that's where the struggle starts, because I think we've been talking today about sort of conventions and falling back into old ways, and going back to that idea of, as a university, we want to work with the local council. It's good for us, and the council want to work for us because you know it's mutually beneficial. But we did say this is co-production. You need to try and learn from what we can bring in terms of best practice, and we will work with you and we'll learn about your challenges and circumstances, and we'll try and work together on building a new set of practices. So we did a live project with the council, with a friends group, Friends of Sheffield Council. We looked at the main development site in Castlegate, which is where the castle is. So it's this whole quarter was where the markets were demolished. It's owned by the council. It's one of the few major sites that's in Sheffield that's still owned by the council. So we worked with the Friends of Sheffield Castle on an incremental, we didn't even use the word master plan, an incremental vision for the slow start by activation, meanwhile use, sort of preliminary excavation of the castle remains to start to generate interest and development funding. So over time, and the students put about a sort of 7, 8, 9 year time frame to this, over time you could reach a point where you say that site has been regenerated, it's developed, but always with the castle remains, the archaeology, the sort of heritage, but also the creativity of Castlegate at its heart, and never being sort of rinsed away. That was the sort of objectives of the live project. So they did a fantastic job. You know, here you can see the deculverting of the sheaf. Here you can see a sort of gallery building being occupied by meanwhile use and creative practitioners. That's already started. Sort of temporary events, arts installations, the beginnings of the excavation, see that in plan, and then fully, this is skipping an awful lot of phases, but actually culminating in development of residential, mixed use, but very carefully positioned development plots where the archaeological remains could sort of be in and amongst and below this development. And then meanwhile also working around a sort of more informal, creative quarter. So very hybrid, very mixed, very complex in a way. Council loved it. So we had a sort of sharing event where local entrepreneurs came, local citizens, the council were there, friends group. People were completely bowled over by it. The head of city regeneration said, "This is what I've had in my head forever. I just haven't been able to get it out." And then we go back and we're continuing to talk about a master plan that looks like that. And I feel like I'm operating in a parallel universe, you know, When I'm stepping into a meeting and we're talking about that sort of visualisation, and then I'm stepping into another meeting with the same people in the room, and we're talking about how actually this is the vision that we'd like to achieve. And I think for me that's a real problem, and things are stuck if you get into that situation. So I don't know if I really know how, because we're only in the middle of this. I don't really know if I have any sort of tips of how to get beyond that, but I'll keep you posted. Because I think we all, it's not just us, the council are frustrated too, because we all need to understand how to move past this so we can actually achieve a sort of co-produced vision and actually implement it. It's all well and good having pretty pictures on a wall, but we need to know how we can implement it. But meanwhile, local entrepreneurs are just getting on with it, so we need to know how to build off that. Okay, how am I doing for time? I feel like I'm...
Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, are you sure? Yeah, of course. So, just to talk about a couple of networks now, because I think networks are beginning to become the sort of way forward in making the most of these opportunities. So, a couple of years ago, there was a study done by Terry Farrell, of Farrell's Architects, Master Planners, on the state of UK architecture and the built environment. He was commissioned, even though it was an independent report, supposedly he was commissioned by the coalition government to do this. And out of lots of recommendations, there's one that sort of meant a lot to us. Every town and every city should have an urban room. So when Terry Farrell was travelling around with his global practice, he would go to many different sort of Chinese cities, Indian cities, global cities, which would have rooms with big models in, where people would go and look at the development that was happening in their city. He liked that idea. He sort of visualised this happening in every town, every city in the UK. He thought about it perhaps as a community space, not just a sort of demonstration, exhibition space, where people could start to actually have a conversation about the past, present, future of their towns and cities. Fantastic. So, because we were working in LiveWorks, at that stage we hadn't called it an urban room, but I went to an urban room meeting that came off the back of the Farrell Review, and I was asked to chair a new network. So this is what we've been working on in the last sort of 18 months now. So we took on Terry Farrell's, or the Farrell Review's, quite basic definition, and we fleshed it out. We think it needs to be a physical space. We're very keen on digital platforms, but we actually think an urban room, to do what it needs to do, needs to be physical. People need to have a place where they can meet each other, yeah, and get to know who's in their community, who lives near where they live, and who works near where they work. So yes, get involved in the past, present and future, but really actively involved, especially in the future of that place. So we talk a lot about creative methods. There's an awful lot of artists involved in the Urban Rooms Network. And we talk about active participation in place. So you're working on the place, in the place, if you see what I mean. You're there, you're looking out the window, and that's what you're working with. The people walking through the door are the people who live there. It's all very immediate, it's very, very one-to-one. So it's quite a flourishing network. We've recently just last Tuesday, we had a conference in London. We had 120 people show up. The membership is growing. We've got a number of urban rooms that have either happened and they were temporary, so they're finished, or they're current, or that are just on stream. They're just about to come up, and they're all different. We've got local authorities like Cheltenham. We go to them. So this is Cheltenham's. This is a local authority, and the conservation officer has set up an urban room. So Cheltenham is a Georgian town. It's got fantastic heritage. But he wants to ask people whether that actually means anything to them now. So he's setting up an urban room to do that. New London architecture is very flash, it's very glitzy. It's got an enormous model, and it basically is that model that Terry Farrell was thinking of. You walk in and this sort of projections and animations going on, showing you what the development is going to happen in London. This is Newcastle, which had a temporary urban room, but wants to set up a university-based urban room to get people involved in the city's future. This is Blackburn Urban Room, which was an empty shop. And you see how well they do the graphics. It's just fantastic. That neon just shouted, we're here, things are changing, So it's really, really got lots of attention. So yes, this is the conference we had last Tuesday in London, where we had a number of people doing what you've just been doing, really, trying to work out how to set up a good community engagement project. And if an urban room is appropriate, then how would an urban room be set up? And we gave them a canvas. And it's interesting what, it sort of mirrors what you've just been looking at, because we always said start with the why. Don't just go to the what and the how, but start with the why. Why is this a good idea now and not any other time, and here and not somewhere else? Why? And actually go back to the why, So all the way through, and then why all the way back to the beginning. So it's just that idea of working through to the pragmatics, but first of all having an ethos, a set of key principles and drivers. And then yes, what we're trying to do is actually quite similar to what hopefully will come out, what is going to come out of this series, which is sort of a one-stop shop for good participation, So this will be a website where people will go for best practice, case studies, top tips, resources, on how to set up an urban room and how to run it well. And then just the final, the map's disappeared now. That's weird. That's a map of Europe. That's telling, isn't it? That's rather ironic. I didn't do that on purpose, honest. We're actually really proud of this because in the university we're terrified of losing European funding off the back of Brexit. And so we're very proud of receiving joint research council funding as a European project. So this is it's called Smart Urban Futures funding. And LiveWorks is one of the network partners, and we're going to be working with Tampere in Finland, Ljubljana in Slovenia, and Bucharest in Romania, academic, non-academic partners, but all wanting to work locally. We're not calling them urban rooms, because that's a sort of UK idea, but we're calling them local hubs, and we're calling it super site specific, and it's all about working very, very locally and very much responsive to what's happening in that situation, but learning across the network. So we'll be travelling around and visiting the local hubs, people will be coming to LiveWorks, we'll be sharing resources and knowledge. And over 3 years, we've got funding for 3 years, we're working in the same places and hopefully understand the impact that we're making as universities and non-academic partners in those places, and then being able to share that across the network and beyond. And I think that's it. Yes, that's it. Sorry to take a bit longer, but hopefully you found that interesting.